Hello, this is Paula Martinez Bench from the Knowledge Stacks podcast, a podcast built on listener submissions, current events, and politics sprinkled with insightful historical context, mainly about Puerto Rico, for curious leftist comrades. We're learning and we want to learn with you. We're planting seeds because we believe we only reap what we sow, so let's sow knowledge, positivity, and accountability and watch our garden grow together. To submit your local stories, provide historical context, elaborate on a subject, or make corrections to a previously reported story, shoot us an email at knowledgesax01@gmail.com. You can find our weekly podcast on SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter, Podbean, Libsyn, and YouTube. All relevant links can be found in wherever the description box may be located on whatever platform this podcast has been found. So last episode, I told y'all, I told everybody listening to this podcast that they were going to try and privatize PREPA, and guess what? This is from ABC News, by the Associated Press, and it came out today. Today is Tuesday, January 23rd. Hope. Fear as Puerto Rico moves to privatize power company. One of the largest public utilities in the United States might soon be up for sale. But many wonder who would want to buy a power company that is $9 billion in debt and has an infrastructure nearly 3 times older than the industry average. All right. And let me do one more thing before we really get into this privatization in Puerto Rico, the United Corporations of America. Let's see what they're doing today, right? According to www.infrastructurereportcard.org, our aviation infrastructure has a grade of D, our bridges C+, our dams D, our drinking water D, energy D+, hazardous waste D+, inland waterways D, levees D, ports C+, public parks D+, rail B, roads D, schools D+, solid waste C+, transit D-, wastewater D+, and people on Twitter who argue with you have the audacity to tell you that America is the greatest country on earth. How ignorant are you, and how long have you been under that rock? So this is an overview of energy. Much of the U.S. energy system predates the turn of the 21st century. Most electric transmission and distribution lines were constructed in the 1950s and 60s, with a 50-year life expectancy, and more than 640,000 miles of high-voltage transmission lines in the lower 48 power grids are at full capacity. Energy infrastructure is undergoing increased investment to ensure long-term capacity and sustainability. In 2015, 40% of additional power generation came from natural gas and renewable systems. Without greater attention to aging equipment, capacity bottlenecks, and increased demand, as well as increasing storm and climate impacts, Americans will likely experience longer and more frequent power interruptions. So let's go back to this article from the ABC News. Concerns also are growing about whether plans to privatize Puerto Rico's electric power authority will translate into more affordable electric bills and more reliable service, with people in the United States territory saying they cannot afford another financial blow as they struggle to recover from Hurricane Maria amid an 11-year recession. Quote, "Some people have faith that privatization will improve everything, but it's not a guarantee," said Puerto Rico economist Jose Caraballo. Quote, "If a good deal isn't hammered out, Puerto Rico can end up worse than it is, unquote. It is gonna end up worse. Privatization hardly ever improves the system, period. We've seen an increase of privatization on the mainland, and look at the grade of the infrastructure for power. It's D. It's a D. Most of the transmission lines, most of the infrastructure that's in place for electric generation hasn't been improved since the 1950s. The power company, once known as the government's crown jewel, has seen a reduction in employees and a drop in the demand for energy amid a deep economic crisis and recent austerity measures. The agency now has some 5,800 employees and serves nearly 1.5 million customers with infrastructure that is roughly 45 years old, which officials say caused frequent power outages before the hurricane and an island-wide blackout in September 2016 that lasted a couple of days. I've been telling you guys this. The company also has long been criticized for political patronage and inefficiency because of austerity. That's why, because of neoliberalism. Anyway, and recently faced accusations of corruption. Yeah, because of the whole deal with Whitefish. Why is it that Ricardo Ramos from PREPA signed a contract for $300 million with a company that is in Whitefish, Montana, which is a hotbed of white supremacy, that at the time that Hurricane Maria hit the island, only 2 full-time employees were there? I'm just saying, that is crazy. That is unacceptable. The power outage that's currently happening in Puerto Rico still, and it's January 23rd, and Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit the island in September, that would never happen on the mainland, not in a million years. In June 2016, the owner of the U.S. territory's biggest oil supplier was arrested after being charged with misappropriating $11 million in public funds. Jose Gonzalez Amador and his company, Petra West, are accused of charging the power company a 0.5% municipal tax, even though some municipalities granted them a lower rate or waived the tax altogether. Authorities say the charge was then passed on to consumers. Given that situation, can the U.S. territory attract any takers? Of course they can, because in the United Corporations of America loves to exploit. They love to exploit the poor. Industry analysts say it's a bit too early to tell. Even though last episode I told you and I read to you the article, snippets of the article from The Intercept about the privatization of PREPA after Hurricane Irma, and within that article, I can't remember the exact quote, but basically, since 2012, the elites have been wanting to privatize PREPA on the island. And probably before that, but it's documented. They wrote an article together and published it in, I think, was it the Wall Street Journal or some right-wing piece of crap publication. Actually, you know what? Let's go back to that Intercept article really quick. Really quick. So I'm going to read snippets of this article. Hurricane Irma unleashes the forces of privatization in Puerto Rico. This was reported September 12th of last year, 2017, in The Intercept. Although the buzz about privatization picked up in the lead-up to and aftermath of Irma, it's been on the agenda for years. Lisa Donahue, a consultant enlisted by PREPA to restructure the agency's debt, floated the idea before Congress last year, and governors of Puerto Rico have discussed privatization as far back as 2012. At the end of July, 4 of the 7 oversight board members pinned a Wall Street Journal op-ed titled "Privatize Puerto Rico's Power," published just after the body had rejected a restructuring proposal from PREPA. Quote, "We believe that only privatization will enable PREPA to attract the investments it needs to lower costs and provide more reliable power throughout the island. By shifting from a government entity to a well-regulated private utility, PREPA can modernize its power supply, depoliticize its management, reform pensions, and renegotiate labor and other contracts to operate more efficiently." They're trying to get rid of UTIER. They're trying to get rid of UTEIR. They're trying to get rid of the lineman union. All right, so, I mean, and there's so many other problematic issues within that statement from an op-ed written by 4 of the 7 oversight board members that were chosen by the Obama administration in August of 2016. This is neoliberalism. This is colonization. This is colonialism. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead. There's another part I wanted to read. This is from the Intercept article. "It's not as if PREPA's existing experiments with privatization have been success stories. The utility currently purchases around 30% of its power from 2 private sources, an AES coal plant in Guayama and a natural gas plant in Peñuelas, owned by the Spanish company Ecoeléctrica. AES sparked a major fight in the area and abroad for the plant's dumping of coal ash, which can seep into waterways and cause a number of health problems. Post Irma, UTIER, it's UTIER, not UTE. I said it wrong. The acronym is UTIER. The PREPA Utility Workers Union denounced both of the private providers for shutting down during the storm to protect their infrastructure, straining both public providers and unionized workforce. Were swaths of PREPA to be privatized, it's also likely that UTIER, UTIER, would be disbanded. The starving mismanagement and privatization of PREPA couldn't come at a worse historical moment. The only real path to dramatically reducing carbon emissions in order to stave off cataclysmic climate change runs through a World War II level exertion by the public sector energy industry. Instead, in the wake of Hurricane Irma, Puerto Rico is headed in the opposite direction. So let's go back to the ABC News article. Quote, "It's a complicated arrangement. What's going to happen to the workers? Where is the debt going to land? What are the contracts going to look like? There are a lot of details here that have very real implications on how much electricity is going to cost for Puerto Rican customers," said Kathy Kunkel, an energy analyst with the Ohio-based Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. She was also interviewed as an expert in the Intercept article. She said her main concern is that the privatization process could occur without the presence of a regulatory body, which also in that Intercept article dips into a little bit, and you can read that on your own, which is needed in part to look after consumers' interests on an island where power bills have been double the average of those on the U.S. mainland. So, did you hear that? Puerto Ricans have already been paying double for power. Let me go back some. So Kathy Kunkel said her main concern is that the privatization process could occur without the presence of a regulatory body, which is needed in part to look after consumers' interests on an island where power bills have been double the average of those on the mainland, in part because imported fuel supplies 3/4 of the energy consumed in Puerto Rico, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. This is a clip from Democracy Now! Austerity, divestment, and IRMA. Juan Gonzalez on why 300,000 in Puerto Rico are without power. And this is after Hurricane Irma.
Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. The FEMA administrator, Brock Long, is traveling today to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. He just announced this morning to see firsthand the damage caused by Hurricane Irma. On the island of St. John in the Virgin Islands, 80% of homes have been severely damaged. Meanwhile, in Puerto Rico, 300,000 people remain without power. Authorities have warned parts of Puerto Rico could be without electricity for up to 6 months, in part due to the island's economic crisis. Juan, you've been closely covering the situation in Puerto Rico. What does the hurricane have to do with the political crisis in Puerto Rico?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand that the hurricane didn't really hit Puerto Rico head-on like it did in Cuba or even in the other Caribbean islands. It basically glanced of the island, and yet many people on the island were stunned to see the so much electricity go down, as you mentioned.
I do want to mention, too, there is this misconception that Hurricane Irma did not affect Puerto Rico. It did affect people in Puerto Rico. I feel like Juan Gonzalez is really playing this down, but people in the central part of Puerto Rico were affected by Hurricane Irma, and there are people who are in municipalities like San Juan in Rio Piedras that haven't had power for over 120 days. I mean, excuse me, now it's getting closer to 200 days, people without power since Hurricane Irma. It's almost been a year. That's terrifying. That is awful. We'll go back to the clip.
Many people on the island were stunned to see the so much electricity go down. As you mentioned, at the beginning when the hurricane hit, about as many as 1 million people went without electricity, and about a third of the people lost water because so many of the pumping stations, water pumping stations in Puerto Rico, depend on the electrical grid for their power source, so that there are hundreds of thousands of people also without water on the island. And the reality is that the electrical system of Puerto Rico has been in crisis now for decades. And just one example, in the electrical company, which is a government-owned electrical company, it's called PREPA, the Puerto Rican Electric Power Authority, in 2000 had about 7,000 linemen to take care of repairs along the system. Today it has 3,500. 50% of the workforce has been reduced. And so when even a hurricane like this gets near the island, it creates enormous devastation for the electrical system. And now this has become the basis for the attempts to privatize the electrical system, because the electrical company is the crown jewel of industry in Puerto Rico. Everybody needs electricity, especially in an island that is so hot and humid and is so industrialized, so that there's been efforts now to try to privatize PREPA. And of course, the source of how the electricity is generated in Puerto Rico is critical. One example: 51% of all the electricity in Puerto Rico is produced through burning petroleum, compared to less than 1% of all the electricity generated in the United States is generated through petroleum. In addition, coal and natural gas, fossil fuels amount for about 98% of the generating power of the electrical system in Puerto Rico. Very little wind or solar generation. So part of the problem is that Puerto Rico has the most expensive way of generating its electricity, and then there's no investment in the capital infrastructure or in the workforce. So anything like this, a hurricane like this, immediately creates a crisis that will be for months in order to be repaired.
And that story came out September 12th of last year. So there's a lot of factors that, and I know I repeat myself fairly often, but there are a lot of factors, there are a lot of elements that go into this privatization process. This is not something that happens overnight. Last episode, I also covered another story. You can listen to the podcast, or you can look on the notes in the show notes of that podcast for another article that came out in The Intercept. It was about how the Army Corps of Engineers stole supplies from a warehouse owned by PREPA, in which PREPA says that the only supplies that were there were for capitalist ventures, while the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was saying that PREPA was hoarding materials and preventing linemen from doing their jobs. And PREPA accused the Army Corps of Engineers of hoarding materials and preventing UTIER linemen from doing their jobs, from preventing unionized linemen from doing their jobs who worked for PREPA. So, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, FAMA, PREPA, they're all preventing power from being restored to Puerto Ricans in order to prime people, in order to gain permission to privatize. And then there's some new obstacles that have come into light, which I will also get into in this episode. But I'm going to go back to the ABC News story. Quote, private investors will want to make a profit, she said, but you have to contrast that with the waste and mismanagement that the power company has shown over the years. Any sale would have to be approved by a federal judge because the power company entered a bankruptcy-like process last year because PREPA's $9 billion in debt, and approval is first needed from legislators, which is unclear will happen. Puerto Rico Senate President Thomas Rivera, Shaz, said Tuesday that he will study the upcoming measure to ensure it's in the best interest of Puerto Rico and no one else. Quote, privatization can be a great tool, but it is not a magic wand, he said, noting that Puerto Rico once privatized its water and sewer company only to have the government take it back in the early 2000s after problems with service, billing, and quality requirements set by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. The same agency that told Puerto Ricans that it was okay for them to drink from Superfund sites. That one. The United Corporations of America has been killing indigenous people worldwide, especially on the mainland. Then you have the same people who lost trillions of dollars, the Pentagon, right? So the same government, the same people that have lost trillions of dollars, the same people who contract with private agencies, who contract war with private agencies, that one. The same government that's systematically killing black and brown people. Yeah, I definitely trust them to know what they're doing. If legislators approve the governor's measure, then Governor Ricardo Rosselló said his administration will monitor the market and start accepting offers from those interested in buying the power company's assets. Ricardo Rosselló is a Republican and Trump supporter and is selling off the island piece by piece, like I have been telling you, like independistas all over the United States have been telling you. The U.S. government does not care. And they want us all dead. Because it puts money in their pocket. Because we have profitized everything in this country. Rosselló said privatization would both improve service and lower power bills. That's BS. And he predicted it would lead to more investment in renewable energy projects. You know how I know that's BS? This is an excerpt from Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. It's a book that came out, I believe, in... Let me see what year it came out. So this book came out in 2014. This is page 51. And this points to what really lies behind the casual attitude about climate change, whether it's being expressed as disaster denialism or disaster capitalism. Those involved feel free to engage in these high-stakes gambles because they believe that they and theirs will be protected from the ravages in question, at least for another generation or so. On a large scale, many regional climate models do predict that wealthy countries, most of which are located at higher latitudes, may experience some economic benefits from a slightly warmer climate. From longer growing seasons to access to shorter trade routes through the melting Arctic ice, at the same time the wealthy in these regions are already finding ever more elaborate ways to protect themselves from the coming weather extremes, sparked by events like Superstorm Sandy. New luxury real estate developments are marketing their gold-plated private disaster infrastructure to would-be residents, everything from emergency lighting to natural gas-powered pumps and generators to 13-foot floodgates and watertight rooms sealed, quote, submarine-style, unquote, in the case of a new Manhattan condominium. As Stephen G. Klagerman, the executive director of development marketing at Halstead Property, told the New York Times, I think buyers would happily pay to be relatively reassured they wouldn't be terribly inconvenienced in case of a natural disaster, unquote. Many large corporations, meanwhile, have their own backup generators to keep their lights on through mass blackouts, like the one in Puerto Rico right now, as Goldman Sachs did during Sandy, despite the fact that its power never actually went out. The capacity to fortify themselves with their own sandbags, which Goldman also did ahead of Sandy, and their own special teams of meteorologists. FedEx, insurance companies in the United States have begun dispatching teams of private firefighters to their high-end customers when their mansions in California and Colorado are threatened by wildfires. A, quote, concierge, unquote, service pioneered by AIG. Meanwhile, the public sector continues to crumble, thanks in large part to the hard work of the warriors here at the Heartland Conference, because this chapter is The Right is Right about Heartland Institute. These, after all, are the forever dismantlers of the state, whose ideology has eroded so many parts of the public sphere, including disaster preparedness. These are the voices that have been happy to pass on the federal budget crisis to the states and municipalities, which in turn are coping with it by not repairing bridges or replacing fire trucks. The quote-unquote freedom agendas that they are desperately trying to protect from scientific evidence is one of the reasons that societies will be distinctly less prepared for disasters when they come. And Hurricane Maria is the result of these legislations, of this lobbying. What's happening in Puerto Rico is in part of right-wing groups, but definitely because of neoliberalism. It's both. For a long time, environmentalists spoke of climate change as a great equalizer, the one issue that affected everyone, rich or poor. It was supposed to bring us together, yet all signs are that it is doing precisely the opposite, satisfying us further into a society of haves and have-nots, divided between those whose wealth offers them a not insignificant measure of protections from ferocious weather, at least for now, and those left to the mercy of increasing dysfunctional states. There is a two-tiered society for sure. So Rosello's selling off pieces of the island. These people think that this is going to benefit them in the long run because they're enriching themselves, but in actuality, climate change is going to become the great equalizer because you can only protect yourself so long from what's happening outdoors, and it's completely out of control. And these billionaires think that they're gods because they have so much money. $1 billion is 1,000,000 millions. So this is an excerpt from CNN Money. The 1% grabbed 82% of all wealth created in 2017. More than $8 of every $10 of wealth created last year went to the richest 1%. That's according to a new report from Oxfam International, which estimates that the bottom 50% of the world's population saw no increase in wealth. The trend shows that the global economy is skewed in favor of the rich, rewarding wealth instead of work. Quote, the billionaire boom is not a sign of a thriving economy, but a symptom of a failing economic system, unquote, said Winnie Bayayima, executive director of Oxfam International. The head of the advocacy group argued that the people who, quote, make our clothes, assemble our phones, and grow our food, unquote, are being exploited in order to enrich corporations and the super wealthy. The study, released ahead of the World Economic Forum in Davos, was produced using data from Credit Suisse's CS Global Wealth Data Book. The report also highlights the detrimental effects of gender inequality, with data that show more men own land, shares, and other capital assets than women. Rising inequality has been a major topic at Davos for years. Oxfam said Monday that it is time for the global elite to stop talking about inequality and start changing their ways. Governments also need to tackle tax avoidance and put limits on shareholder returns and executive pay, Oxfam said. The group argues companies should not issue dividends to shareholders unless they pay their workers a living wage. Oxfam also said that tax policies should be used to reduce extreme wealth. All of which I agree with. I actually believe in a more extreme leftist ideology, but I won't say I will compromise, but I could function in a more socialistic society. Abso-freaking-lutely, I would love to see this, but the reality is the elites are greedy, and greed is a disease, and these people are infected. Also, speaking of which, white men holding most of the world's wealth. So this is from The Guardian. Inequality gap widens as 42 people hold same wealth as 3.7 billion poorest. The development charity Oxfam has called for action to tackle the growing gap between rich and poor as it launched a new report showing that 42 people hold as much wealth as the 3.7 billion who make up the poorest half of the world's population. So this is more in depth than that CNN article. In a report published on Monday to coincide with the gathering of some of the world's richest people at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Oxfam said billionaires had created at a record rate of one every 2 days over the past 12 months, at a time when the bottom 50% of the world's population has seen no increase in wealth. It added that 82% of the global wealth generated in 2017 went to the most wealthy 1%. The charity said it was, quote, unacceptable and unsustainable, unquote, for a tiny minority to accumulate so much wealth while hundreds of millions of people struggled on poverty pay. It called on world leaders to turn rhetoric about inequality into policies to tackle tax evasion and boost the pay of workers. Mark Goldring, Oxfam GB chief executive, said, quote, the concentration of extreme wealth at the top is not a sign of a thriving economy, but a system that is failing the millions of hardworking people on poverty wages who make our clothes and grow our food, unquote. And to specify what that system is that this man fails to mention is white supremacy and patriarchy. Those are the systems that remove wealth from the lower 98% of Americans. Booming global stock markets have been the main reason for the increase in wealth of those holding financial assets during 2017. The founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, saw his wealth rise by $6 billion in the first 10 days of 2017 as a result of a bull market on Wall Street, making him the world's richest man. Oxfam said it made changes to its wealth calculations as a result of new data from the bank Credit Suisse. Under the revised figures, 42 people hold as much wealth as the 3.7 billion people who make up the poorer half of the world's population, compared with 61 people last year and 380 in 2009, the year after the stock market crash of 2008. At the time of last year's report, Oxfam said the 8 billionaires held the same wealth as half of the world's population. The charity added that the wealth of billionaires had risen by 13% a year on average in the decade from 2006 to 2015. With the increase of $762 billion in 2017, enough to end extreme poverty 7 times over. It said 9 out of 10 of the world's $2,043 billionaires were men. 42 people hold as much wealth as 3.7 billion people. Jeff Bezos is trash. So, in those 2 articles, they talked about how the world's wealth is owned by a majority of men. Like, the whole entire world's wealth is owned by white men, a majority of white men. Here, and this is from Me Too. Here's a breakdown of the caca reasons Latinas make 54 cents on her male counterpart's dollar. We all know that on average, women workers earn 80 cents for every dollar earned by the average man. However, that mostly accounts for white women. What a lot of people don't know is that only accounts for white women. When you start calculating the wage disparity for women of color, the number starts dropping dramatically. Black women make 64 cents on the dollar, and Latinas earn the least of all, only bringing home 54 cents on the dollar. That's a figure that persists despite the fact that the number of Latinas receiving a higher education and owning their own businesses has seen a significant increase. If you're confused about why you're working just as hard and getting half as much, here's a look at some of the reasons. There's a gap in the education system that's trickling over to equal pay. Latinos are less likely to enroll in 4-year universities than white students, most commonly as a result of the high cost of higher education. On average, tuition at 4-year schools are 2 times more expensive than at community colleges. Delve deeper into why Latinos generally avoid incurring these extra expenses, and you'll see it's because they are more prone to receiving lower financial aid rewards and are more resistant on taking on debt. But what happens when Latinas go for that college degree? As a general rule, a person's salary increases for every year of education and degree they add on to their slate. That's for both men and women. But if lapping up college, masters and PhDs was all it really took to raise your salary, that would be one thing. However, for every academic level women and men achieve, women's earnings still remain lower than men's. In fact, the gender pay gap can be even greater in careers where women and men obtain the same higher levels of education. Education can improve a Latina's earning prospects, but it still can't erase the gender, race, and ethnicity factors that affect wage imbalance. Latinas are also more likely to take a time out from the workforce to work as caregivers. Today's women still continue to take on more of the caregiving responsibilities in their households, and a huge part of this stems from the fact that men aren't afforded paternity leave. The Family Medical Leave Act currently gives women 12 weeks of unpaid job-protected leave. This means women are pushed into taking time off over their husbands and aren't paid for it. Not only that, but just 15% of white people live in multi-generational households in the United States, meaning a home where a parent, grandparent, or other family member also live. For white women, caregiver responsibilities are generally contained to their children. The rate of Latinos in multi-generational households jumps to 25%, according to 2014 census data. For Latinas living in multi-generational families, however, caregiver responsibilities fall to them for not just their children, but also all their family members living in the home. This means the odds of Latinas needing to take time off of work increases, particularly by the number of children and elders in their households. Nearly a third of Latinas working in the United States are part of the service industry, which is also known for its flat and low wages. The service industry claims almost a third of Latinas as workers. At the same time, Latinas are largely underrepresented in jobs that are higher paying. Fields that have been traditionally dominated by men, such as construction, engineering, and science, are working to close the gap. Still, with fewer Latinas achieving higher education than white women and men, the odds of getting into these fields while obtaining equal pay are stacked against them. On top of that, there's still such a thing called as pay secrecy. There's a cultural taboo that hinders us from talking about salaries and spotting wage disparities. Even more effective at keeping women from being aware of how little they are getting paid are actual work policies that prevent us from asking about how much they're making. Supervisors, independent contractors, and agricultural laborers don't fall under the employees who are protected under the law. This means that they are often pushed into signing contracts that keep them from finding out how much their coworkers earn. Even with various government efforts to block employers from keeping their workers quiet, many women still find themselves discouraged from discussing their salaries. As such, Latinas are often prevented from discovering how their salaries compare to others, and as a result, the existence of the wage gap continues to be perpetuated. Latinas have a long road to haul before the gender wage finally closes. At our current rate, the wage equality gap will close around the year 2152. That's 136 years from now. If that math looks funny to you, remember there's always a right time to go and get yours. Help close the gap by talking to your male co-workers about their wages, demanding raises when you know you deserve them, and speaking up when you know your work is being undervalued. But then, if you speak up, there's a potential that you could lose your job, because here in Kentucky is a fire at will state, and they will fire you, and they do not care about you, and they don't care. And that's another thing too. It's all right. You can speak up, and you need to say what you need to say, and you need to stand up for yourself. But we live in a world where it doesn't, sometimes it really doesn't matter. You're not seen as a human. You're seen as a worker. You're seen as a robot. You can be automated. That's the way people look at you when you work a low-wage job. They don't care about you. When I go to work sometimes, I'm treated like a cash machine. People literally throw their money at me. And there's nothing you can say or do because you don't want to be construed as rude, because you don't want any acts of violence to happen to you. You don't want some psycho to all of a sudden take out their gun because I live in an open carry state. And I don't know, people are crazy. So having all of this in mind, let's finish the ABC News article. Rosello said the electrical grid is not designed for Puerto Rico's current needs, noting that the greatest demand exists in the northern part of the island, while the main generation plants are in the south. In addition to its aging infrastructure, the company, known by its initials PREPA, has lost 30% of its employees in the last 5 years, 86% of whom worked in maintenance, he added. The company has also faced internal turmoil. Its director was forced out in November after the utility failed to immediately call for help from its mainland counterparts after Hurricane Maria. Instead, PREPA, in part because of the Whitefish Energy Holdings contract, and I've already talked about all their strange connections to Ryan Zinke, white supremacy, HBC Investments, which is Joe Colaneta, who is the CEO of that company, who donated to Rick Perry, who donated to Trump. Yeah, it's very odd. It's very strange, all these connections that these people have with each other. And it's not strange, because if you know how this country actually functions, if you understand how the United Corporations of America actually function and how these elites all know each other, you've seen the picture of Hillary Clinton at Trump's wedding smiling. If I hate someone, I don't go to their wedding. PREPA was blamed for the failure to distribute badly needed parts found in one of its warehouses, even as repairs to the storm-damaged powered system went undone for lack of supplies. Monday's announcement by Rosselló comes as more than 30% of customers remain without electricity more than 4 months after Hurricane Maria, and critics say he took advantage of that situation to rally support for his plan. Ángel Figueroa, president of a union representing power company workers, said Tuesday that the union opposes the governor's plan, but will not go on strike, noting that nearly 500,000 Puerto Ricans are still without power. However, he said the union will take on undisclosed measures, noting they have the support of unions that represent other types of workers, including teachers. It's not every man for himself, he said. Everyone here will be affected. Figueroa warned that power bills would only increase given the drop in demand for electricity in recent years, as roughly 500,000 Puerto Ricans have fled for the U.S. mainland, and especially if a private company decides to invest in new infrastructure. I want to add another story. Over 200,000 Puerto Ricans have arrived in Florida since Hurricane Maria. This is from NBC News. The exodus of Puerto Ricans to Florida following Hurricane Maria has reached a whopping 200,000 in just over 2 months, obliterating initial conservative estimates that had put the number at 100,000. Maria Teresa Rosado, 37, and her husband Luis Flores, 33, arrived in Miami over the weekend to start rebuilding their lives. Wednesday, the couple was at a hurricane relief center at Miami International Airport, which was set up by the state to make it easier for those arriving to get settled. The couple said that as of now, they're not planning to return to the island even if power is restored and the economic recession subsides. Flores, a hospital worker, said he sometimes had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying food. Quote, "There is more opportunity here for us to grow as professionals," unquote, Rosado, who was a retail manager, said. Hurricane Maria trounced Puerto Rico on September 20th, and since then, families have been boarding planes to the mainland with no end in sight. Flights from the island are booked solid through the end of the year. This was published in November of 2017. According to the Florida Division of Emergency Management, over 208,000 people from Puerto Rico have landed at airports in Miami, Orlando, and Tampa since October 3rd. A total of 7,756 Puerto Rican students have enrolled in Florida public schools during the same period. The largest enrollments are in Orange and Osceola counties in Central Florida, which has the heaviest concentration of Puerto Ricans. Victoria Solá and Andrea Marrero, two friends, missed a semester of classes at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. They said although the university opened, they did not go to classes because the conditions were bleak with no power. All right, that's just snippets. All right, since the initial aftermath of the hurricane, Fernandez has predicted a total of 500,000 to 750,000 Puerto Ricans would leave the island in a 4-year period. The scale of migration is larger than any other in Puerto Rican's history. Quote, "Puerto Rico will be seen by historians as before and after Maria," said Luis Martinez Fernandez, a history professor at the University of Central Florida, calling it a, quote, "watershed moment," unquote. That's a lot. 500,000 to 750,000 Puerto Ricans are going to leave the island in a 4-year period. No, guys, we have to batallamos. We have to fight. We're going to lose the island. It's going to be given to the elites. Like, we have to fight. If you come to the mainland, there's nothing here for you. Latinas do not make as much as the white man, and we will not make as much as the white man until 136 years from now. Que bochorno that we would sell ourselves out for what? People are struggling to survive here in the continental United States, and they're still struggling to pay their electric bills. You can read that article on your own. I just wanted to highlight the migration. Then there was an article that came out in 2014 in CNN. Puerto Ricans leaving island for U.S. in record numbers. It was updated. So this article was updated May 2nd, 2016. Puerto Ricans are leaving the island for the mainland United States at a historic rate. The Commonwealth's Institute of Statistics revealed Sunday the results of its analysis on 2014 migration, which found that Puerto Rico lost almost 2% of its population that year. About 84,000 people moved from Puerto Rico to the United States in 2014, according to the report, while only 20,000 moved back to the island, resulting in a net migration of 1.8%. On average, 230 people left per day, enough to fill 2 daily flights out of the island. The result is the highest net migration recorded in the past decade, the institute said. Puerto Rico, now 10 years into a recession, is deep in debt and often compared to Greece and Detroit. More Puerto Ricans now live in the mainland United States than on the island itself, which eases the transition of Puerto Ricans to move. In the 1950s, most Puerto Ricans moved to New York, but Florida has been the main destination in the last 10 years. The Institute's report gathers data from the U.S. Census Bureau and the U.S. Census Bureau of Transportation Statistics. For the past 6 decades, Puerto Rico has looked at the 1950s as a point of reference for mass exodus. Back then, close to 500,000 inhabitants left the island. But most recent data suggests that Puerto Rico may be experiencing an even greater wave of migration, the Institute of Statistics said. Between 2010 and 2014, more people moved from the island to the United States than in the first half of the 1950s, when the net migration was estimated at 237,000, according to the organization. In the first half of the current decade, 263,000 people flew to the United States and didn't return. So there has been a mass exodus of Puerto Ricans, and 200,000 Puerto Ricans have left the island since Hurricane Maria hit for Central Florida. They want a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans. America is a disgusting nation of colonizers. No one belongs here except the native people and who they decide to allow into this country. But the United Corporations of America, the elites, have brainwashed the masses with neoliberalism. The system never changed. I'm going to keep saying that. Like, people think this is some radical new idea. It's not. We're all just playing the same roles. We haven't moved past anything. We haven't made any progress. We just label things and call it something new. And people live in this mainstream media bubble. Like, it's important to read the news, and it's important to keep up with it. But to sit there and say that what Rachel Maddow says is the end-all, be-all truth every single day is bullcrap. You even have to question what I say. The only motives I have is independence for Puerto Rico and to make it as to the left as people are comfortable with. You know what? I'm not for imperialism or violence to enforce my views on other people. But if there are other people who are down for a revolution of some sort, I will support it. if my leftist ideas are supported within this revolution, I will support that revolution, but I'm not going to sit here and promote violence. That's not me. If other people are, I'm for anarchy. I'm an anarcho-communist. Like, I'm for, and you know what? I'm for socialism. Whatever gets us to the left gets us to the left at this point. Because I'm tired of watching my people die. I'm tired of yelling into a microphone on the floor of my closet, hoping somebody hears this and shares it, and is like, whoa, this girl, she needs her message out there so people can know about Puerto Rico and the years of colonization. And this isn't anything new. This isn't something that just sprang up out of nowhere and was like, oh man, all of a sudden Puerto Rico is a crap hole. No, it's been like this. It's been manufactured in this way to make the island uninhabitable for people, so they have to leave. So they have to leave their own homeland because they're too poor to live there, because the United Corporations of America doesn't want brown people living there. They colonized my skin with white supremacy, and my parents fed into it. And there's nothing I can do about it, except for tell my truth. And that's all I have. So anyway, Rosselló has said the privatization process could take 18 months, a time frame that Moody's on Tuesday called quite aggressive. The agency said it supports privatization because it would bring in more capital. Because they're going to try and enrich themselves because they're disaster capitalists, because they think their billions of dollars are going to cushion them. Like Naomi Klein said in her book, this changes everything from climate change, but they're stupid. They don't understand that it's going to affect them in the long run. They just don't even know it yet because they're so blinded by their own greed. The same arguments that are pro-privatizing PREPA are the same arguments, even Carmen Yulín Cruz said something about it on Twitter. The same arguments that they're making for the privatization of the electrical grid, they can make for schools. Betsy DeVos's wet dream. Let's go. It's happening, guys. We have to wake up and start fighting and protesting because nothing is ever going to change unless we start doing stuff and protecting our people and sending aid and money back home. They just want to make money off the people living in poverty on the island. And if not, they want to push them out so they can gentrify our whole country and make it white. So right now, apparently what's preventing this from finalizing the contracts with this people that want to buy up PREPA to make money off of it is because they're negotiating a price in an environment of declining Puerto Rico population, investing in rebuilding aging infrastructure, and how PREPA's pension liability would be handled, unquote. People who dedicated their whole lives to a company and being a part of a union, it's going to be gone. All those years of, those hundreds of years, those decades of hard work, gone. Echoing those remarks was the PREPA bondholder group, which said that Island would be better served by a private operator with a proven track record. In recent years, creditors had reached an agreement with the government to restructure the power company, and led to the hiring of a restructuring official who in 2016 noted that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission had recently requested information related to bonds the power company sold in 2012 and 2013. It's unclear whether the SEC has launched a formal investigation. Of course not. None of the rules that apply here on the mainland even apply to the rich. It's always the poor that's getting punished. What do you think is going to happen on the island? An island that regular laws that are from the mainland do not apply there. That is why we cannot file Chapter 9 bankruptcy. We can only file things that are like it. Because some law in the 1980s was passed because of racism. But they'll always say, mysterious reason why. No, it's because the U.S. government is racist. It was built on white supremacy. Duh. Like, people make this it's so mysterious. No, it's not. It's white supremacy and patriarchy, and it's disgusting and gross, and it impoverishes people who actually give a damn. There was a couple other things I want to cover just in general. So this article is from CNBC. Puerto Rico will try and privatize its bankrupt power utility. Whoa. That's a lot. This is what Governor Rosselló said about PREPA. Quote, the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority has become a heavy burden on our people who are now hostage to its poor service and high cost. What we know today as the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority does not work and cannot continue to operate like this. Governor Rosselló gave an overview of how he envisions the 18-month privatization process would work. Quote, the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority will cease to exist as it deficiently operates today. Over the next few days, the process will start, through which PREPA assets will be sold to companies who will transform the generation system into a modern, efficient, and less expensive one for the people, he said. And this is all bullcrap. We saw how the privatization of the sewer system went. They went back and made it public because it was subpar. I mean, this was in the 2000s. Like, this has already happened. Like, are you stupid? And the thing on top of that, his dad was governor around that time. Like, seriously, Governor Rosselló, are you stupid? The three-phase process would start with defining the legal framework through legalization, and then opening the market through legislation, and then opening the market to interested companies. Offers from companies would then be made, and then in the final phase, the terms of awarding and hiring the selected companies would be negotiated. Some experts say, however, that there are crucial components being overlooked. Quote, one of the key considerations that Governor Rosselló neglected to mention in his announcement was that PREPA's bondholders, as well as municipal bond insurers, MBIA, and Assured Guarantee, have a permanent contractual lien on the utility's net revenues, said Mark Palmer, an analyst at BTIG, in a research note issued late on Monday. We believe it would not be feasible for Puerto Rico to sell PREPA's assets without the net revenue lien following those assets to the benefit of AGO, MBI, and bondholders. We also believe that before privatization of the utility could occur, those creditors would have to be satisfied such that it would exit the Title III debt restructuring. While Puerto Rico may attempt such an end-around maneuver, we doubt that it would pass muster with the courts, Palmer, who covers MBIA and Assured Guarantee, said. PREPA has approximately $9 billion in outstanding debt and entered Title III bankruptcy proceedings in July 2017. Both U.S. District Judge Laura Taylor Swain, who is overseeing the island's bankruptcy-like proceedings, and 7-member federally appointed oversight board by the Obama administration, will have to approve the governor's plan for PREPA before it can go forward. We have long said that a full operational and financial transformation of PREPA, including private investment, is necessary to deliver the resilient, reliable, and cost-effective power system that Puerto Rico needs for economic recovery, a spokesperson said for the Oversight Board in a written statement. The Oversight Board welcomes the governor's announcement, because they've been trying to do this since 2012, looks forward to reviewing the government's plans, and intends to incorporate any transformation of PREPA into the revised fiscal plan, which it expects to certify on February 23, 2018. The deadline for PREPA, Puerto Rico Aqueducts and Sewer Authority, and the Commonwealth to submit their revised fiscal plans following Hurricane Maria's destruction is on Wednesday. All three entities were given a 2-week deadline extension to file. Rosello is freaking trash. Not all Puerto Ricans are Democrats. We're definitely not all liberals in the least. And some leftists are shamed on the island, like Oscar Lopez Rivera. He was dragged on his birthday because he told lazy line workers from the mainland to go back to the mainland. I mean, like, people took his quotes completely out of context, and it's disgusting. He was a political prisoner to the United States for 30 years for conspiring, in quotes, conspiring against the U.S. government. The U.S. government is disgusting. It's just, I can't think of another word. Que asqueroso. I mean, like, I get so flustered. I get so angry because I am marginalized and I am completely unheard. And it's just, I'm in like in this in between where I'm like, well, you know, I have certain levels of privilege because this, and this, and this. But then at the same time, it's like I'm constantly fighting and being ignored. And you know what? This is the way it is. And I'm not trying to complain about it. I'm just giving you factual information. I'm just flustered. I'm so flustered. I really just want people to be like, oh crap, you know, things are not as good things aren't going as well as we thought it was, right? So Puerto Rico's water and sewer company was once privatized, but the government had to take it back over in the early 2000s after problems with service billing and quality requirements. So that's from ABC News. This is trash. This is complete trash. Privatizing PREPA is not going to work. It's not going to make anything better. This is what disaster capitalism looks like. This is what Naomi Klein wrote a whole daggum book about. Multiple books. So this story came out in Vox on November 15th. Puerto Rico is starting to take solar power more seriously. Puerto Rico's governor, Ricardo Rosello, has his eye on the sun. And this is so stupid. Like, they don't even know who Ricardo Rosello is. They don't even know he's a Trump supporter. It's disgusting. On Tuesday, in a tense hearing about the island's slow recovery, he told lawmakers that the Isla del Sol now wants solar energy to provide as much as a quarter of its electricity transmitted across microgrids and backed up by batteries. Before Hurricane Maria swept over the island in September, Puerto Rico received a paltry 2% of its electricity from all renewable energy sources. But since the disaster struck, energy experts, legislatures, and solar companies like Tesla have been arguing that Puerto Rico has a tremendous opportunity, a kind of tabula rasa, to rebuild its failed grid to be greener and more resilient. The island is still shrouded in the longest blackout in U.S. history. It's still happening. And most of the grid repair efforts so far have been to rebuild the old system, which is dependent on fossil fuels, which was discussed in the Democracy Now! Clip after Hurricane Irma by Jose Gonzalez. One exception, a children's hospital in San Juan, that was brought back in October with solar panels and batteries manufactured by Tesla. Hospital de Niño is first of many solar plus storage projects going live, grateful to support the recovery of Puerto Rico with Ricardo Rosello. And this is from Tesla. I cannot even believe that's disgusting. Tesla is not a friend of ours. He is not. He is an elite. Any of these people who have whatever money they have in the bank, if you're not giving it to the lower 98%, you are trash. You can do that on your own. You don't have to donate to a charity. You can donate directly to human beings who are doing the work in communities and doing community building. But these people choose not to do that. And that is why they are trash. Jeff Bezos is trash. Anyway, and that was a tweet, by the way, the Tesla tweet. The project followed direct talks in October between Tesla CEO Elon Musk and Rosello on restoring power to Puerto Rico with solar. Entrepreneurs, lawmakers, and activists want more than these small, closed-loop transmission systems called microgrids that are backed up with batteries to keep the power on all night. Puerto Rico, transformed into an archipelago of microgrids, would also, in theory, better stand up to storms and provide cheaper energy. long before Hurricane Maria ripped into Puerto Rico on September 20th, it was clear that one of the island's greatest vulnerabilities was its decrepit, sagging power system, which we've already discussed. Almost entirely dependent on fossil fuels, under the brute force of the Category 4 storm, the aging and poorly maintained power plants and transmission lines sustained such significant damage that nearly a month later, power has only been restored to 26% of the island. So the numbers that we're hearing is anywhere from 30 to 50 to 60% of people on the island don't have power because it comes and goes, which is not discussed in mainstream media because people cannot conceptualize that once something is fixed, if it was already broken and it's not completely replaced, it's going to break again more quickly because the system is already deteriorated. Because in the United States, the infrastructure is average D minus D plus. It doesn't matter. It's still a D. It's a failing freaking grade. Despite ample wind and sun, some of the highest electricity prices in the country, and the steep cost decline in renewable energy technologies, Puerto Rico has fallen far behind other U.S. regions in renewable energy investment, forming barely 2% of its generation mix because of the colonial power of the United States. But that's, let's just ignore that. Right, Vox? Alaska, by contrast, gets close to 4% of its electricity from renewables, excluding hydropower. Quote, fossil fuel companies are very powerful economic interests, said Ruth Santiago, an attorney in Puerto Rico working on environmental issues. Quote, they are often control public policy in terms of energy generation, unquote. Puerto Rico gets much of its energy from large central power plants on the southern coast of the island and transmits power to load centers on its north side. As you can see on this map of the island transmission system, and then there's a link to the map. Imported fossil fuels provide the bulk of the power fuel, with 47% of the island's electricity coming from petroleum, 34% from natural gas, 17% from coal, and just 2% from renewable energy in 2016, according to the Energy Information Administration. In 2015, nearly 72% of Puerto Rico's electricity came from petroleum. In terms of power sources, they decided to keep these really old dinosaur power plants operating. It was just bullcrap. We didn't decide that. Puerto Ricans, just normal everyday Puerto Ricans, not the elites on the island. We didn't decide that for ourselves. We literally have no political voice. We have no voting power. We don't vote in the general election. Our votes don't matter. The people in Congress that represent Puerto Rico, their voices don't matter because their votes don't matter. They have no political power. Governor Rosselló doesn't have any political power because La Junta Fiscal, the 7 people that Obama appointed, have they control all of the decisions on the island. Rosselló cannot make any there's nobody on the island has any political power. So it's not the fault of Puerto Ricans. It's not. We literally have no control on what goes on the island. It is a haven for the elites, and they may not get tax breaks anymore since about 2006 when the recession hit the island before the global recession in 2008. But the point is, that the United Corporations of America is winning on the island of Puerto Rico because of the apathy of the white American. So screw all y'all. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. So we can have all of this energy on the island with solar production, but because of the hold of gas and oil and interests on the mainland, you can read this article. It's fairly long, but you get the gist. At one point in November of 2017, Governor Rosejo was apparently pushing for solar panels, but now he wants to privatize PREPA. And Trump did this. Trump applies tariffs to solar panels washing machines. This came out today, Tuesday, January 23rd. This is from the Associated Press. President Donald Trump on Monday approved tariffs on imported solar energy components in large washing machines in a bid to help U.S. manufacturers. The Republicans' decision followed by recommendations for tariffs by the U.S. International Trade Commission. Quote, the president's actions makes clear, again, the Trump administration will always defend American workers, farmers, ranchers, and businesses in this regard. Unquote, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said in a statement announcing their decision. You are trash. You, sir, are trash. Most imported solar modules will face an immediate tariff of 30%, with the rate declining before phasing out after 4 years. For large residential washing machines, tariffs will start to go up to 50% and phase out after 3 years. China accused Trump of jeopardizing the multilateral trading system by taking action on complaints under U.S. law instead of through the World Trade Organization. Quote, the U.S. side once again abused its trade remedy measures, unquote, said a Commerce Ministry statement. Quote, China expresses its strong dissatisfaction with this, unquote. Mexico said Trump's decision not to exclude it from the measures was, quote, regrettable, unquote. Quote, Mexico will use all available legal resources in response to the U.S. decision to apply protections on Mexican washing machines and solar panels, unquote, its economy department said in a statement. It's just like Trump wants to as many people as he can while he's in office. He just wants to anger and infuriate as many people, and he's a white supremacist, so he doesn't care, and he will never care. The tariffs were sought last year by Suniva Inc., which filed for bankruptcy protection in April, and the U.S. subsidiary of Germany's Solar World. Nearly 30 U.S. solar manufacturing facilities had closed in the past 5 years, they said, as China plotted to flood the global market with cheap products to weaken U.S. manufacturing. Suniva spokesman Mark Postenbach called tariffs, quote, a step forward for this high-tech solar manufacturing industry we pioneered right here in America, unquote. In other words, the United Corporations of America does not want any competition because we want a fascist oligarchy. And this isn't a democracy, and this isn't capitalism, because capitalism depends on competition. But the reality is, in the capitalist system, especially on its end stage, it's always going to resort to violence to maintain the status quo. Anyway, however, solar installers and manufacturers of other equipment used to run solar power systems oppose tariffs, which they said will raise their prices and hurt demand for the renewable energy. The Solar Energy Industries Association, which represents installation companies, said billions of dollars of solar investment will be delayed or canceled, leading to the loss of 23,000 jobs this year. Wow, and then it wasn't even a few months ago that Rosejo was out here saying that he wanted solar panels for Puerto Rico, and now we have more tariffs on top of the tariffs that we already have on goods that are imported to the island. Because there's a variety of tariffs that Puerto Ricans pay because of austerity measures that have been imposed on the Puerto Rican people. And one more thing too. And one more fact. The Intercept. Trump administration tells Puerto Rico it's too rich for aid money. This story came out January 18th of this year. Means testing has now come to disaster aid, and it only applies to Puerto Rico. When Congress passed a $36.5 billion disaster relief bill to bolster rebuilding efforts in several wildfire and hurricane-damaged areas in October, it shortchanged Puerto Rico, giving it a $4.9 billion loan instead of the grant that other areas received. Now it appears the debt and hurricane-ravaged island won't even get that money. First reported in El Nuevo Día, Puerto Rico's daily newspaper, the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Treasury Department informed the Puerto Rican government on January 9th that they will not disperse the loan through the Community Disaster Loans Program after finding that Puerto Rico had a cash balance on December 29th of last year of $1.7 billion for ongoing operations. The letter also cited $6.85 billion scattered in various local government accounts. Since the loan was intended to fill in a gap in day-to-day funding, FEMA determined Puerto Rico does not need the money at this time. Funds will be provided through the CDL program when the Commonwealth's central cash balance decreases to a certain level, unquote, wrote FEMA official Alex Amparo and Deputy Assistant Treasury Secretary Gary Gripo. They didn't specify that level, but added that municipalities could also apply for loans. For loans. Quote, Puerto Rican working families continue to be treated as second-class citizens by the Trump administration and Congress, unquote, said Hector Figueroa, president of the Service Employees International Union's Local 32BJ. In a statement, quote, despite being unable to carry out many vital functions, Puerto Rico is deemed by these federal agencies as not poor enough to qualify for emergency loans. A more recent $81 billion disaster relief bill passed by the House in December also split its aid between Florida, Texas, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands and California for the recent wildfires. In the debate over the bill, Puerto Rico was denied $4.6 billion to boost its Medicaid program, which has long suffered from inequities, receiving less in matching funds than U.S. states. The bill has languished in the Senate, where Democrats want the Medicaid funding included. Puerto Rican officials have said Medicaid funding will run out early this year without the increased funding, though this would seem to fit the definition of ongoing operations covered in the CDL program. FEMA, the Treasury, did not reference Medicaid in their letter. Puerto Rico also took a hit from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Republican overhaul of the tax code, which treats manufacturing operations on the island like they're in a foreign country, subject to large export tax. As The Intercept has recently reported, utility workers restoring power in Puerto Rico have alleged that the Army Corps of Engineers is hoarding supplies that could be used in the reconstruction effort. So FEMA and the Treasury's decision fits with a recent history of smacking Puerto Rico while it's down. Quote, our federal government is telling 3.3 million Puerto Ricans that exercising its colonial power is more important than the survival of Puerto Rico's people. Figueroa of SEIU said. Que bochorno, guys. This is so embarrassing. There's so many people on the island that people don't even care about us. Like, y'all don't even care about us. Y'all say all this stuff. Y'all say it to my face. All these leftists will come up to my face. How's your family doing? Y'all don't care about us. I'm ignored, I'm belittled, all of this stuff is actually happening, and people are just like, it's so complicated, because it's like, I'm doing the most, I'm out here doing the most for everyone I love, I'm out trying to organize here in I don't want to organize in Lexington, Kentucky, this place sucks, I'm tired, I'm so tired. Like, I just want to be respected. I just want and it's not even like I demand respect from people. We all deserve it. Every single one of us, we all deserve better. I shouldn't be out here fighting for my humanity. We all deserve better. That's it for episode 5. That's that. Like, I really don't know what else to say. I hope that you guys have a good week. And que Puerto Rico se levanta. And the only way that it's going to do that is if people actually start caring and get off their butts and start doing organizing work. And like I said, I work. I send money back home. That's why I work. I don't, like, this podcast is a labor of love, and I want to do it because I love to learn, and I love to read, and I love disseminating information, and that's that. Anyway.